Hi guys, welcome back. Matt from MrLeica.com. I hope you're all having a good week. Back with another video, this one's slightly unplanned. Now if you saw my last post, I compared a Leica Elmar 50mm 3.5 to its kind of clone, as they sometimes call it, which is a Industar 50, in this case 50mm 3.5. And it seemed from the results that although they were quite similar, the Industar had better contrast, and in terms of sharpness, I said in the video the Industar had the edge, but after viewing the test shots again, I thought the Elmar was potentially very slightly sharper, but the Industar had better contrast, so at a glance the Industar looked sharper. And then that got me thinking, because these are obviously vintage lenses, but I also have a modern equivalent. Now I'll actually do a proper video on this, but I'll show you briefly. So this is a Voigtlander 50mm f3.5. Again, it's a collapsible design. Now this lens is renowned for being super sharp, and from the few photos I've tested with it, kind of real life photos, it is sharp, no complaints. It's kind of sharp, tick box, job done. Now this lens was released in 2001, whereas the Elmar and the Industar are 1930s/1950s design. There's obviously various iterations, but the original Elmar and the original Industar 10 go back to 1930s. So a modern 2001 lens versus a 1930s lens, one would think the Voigtlander would absolutely kick ass. And from kind of common myth on the internet, they say this is kind of the Leica Apo, 50mm Apo equivalent in Voigtlander terms. It is super duper sharp, and I've never had any complaints. So with that said, the plan was, right, I'll do a three-way test, and here I'll bring up the artwork. This is the photo for the front cover of the video which I was going to post today. All very simple. Elmar versus Industar versus, as I say, Voigtlander 50mm 3.5 Heliar. 3-lens shootout. I thought it'd be very simple. I'd shade out the Voigtlander kick butt, so I put that in the centre of the image, and all very easy, shared results. Job done. Nice quick video. So that indeed was the plan. I shot the test shots for these three photos, but let me just rewind it for 1 second. The reason this all came about is because the sunshine actually came out for the first time as long as I can remember. UK winters aren't the happiest of places. Dark, rain, grey, miserable. But we did have a short spell of sunshine. And so in the excitement of seeing a bright ray of light come through my window, I was like, ooh, let's test some lenses. So I thought perfect way to test the Industar versus Elmar in terms of a real flare test. So I shot the Elmar straight at the sun. Here are the results. Now I had a mirror on the windowsill to give even more kind of flare. So you're getting 2 points of flare. And this is obviously without the hood, and I made sure the sun was hitting the lens. And as you can see, that's a fairly decent amount of flare, as you may expect from this lens, being an old lens. Next up, before the sun went in, I grabbed my Industar 50. Again, shot the same kind of scene, but this time the Industar shows better flare control than the Elmar, which holds true compared to the last video where in my testing I showed that from my results that the Industar performed better in terms of flare resistance versus the Elmar. So that's good, that was all expected. So then I grabbed the Voigtlander and I was like, this is the modern lens, this should do a little bit better. Shot the Voigtlander at the sun. Here's the results. Absolutely gobsmacked in how amazing well the lens controls the flare, being a modern lens and a modern lens coating versus the vintage lenses and the vintage lens coatings, assuming it's all based on the lens coating. Such a difference. So here's the three photos side by side. And as you can see, the Voigtlander just absolutely smashed both of the two lenses. So step forward to today, I thought I'd do a quick sharpness test, wide open, and then I can share the results of the flare and the sharpness together to kind of hopefully educate anybody that was looking at these three lenses in terms of which lens suited them. If you're going to be shooting in the sun all day, there's a very strong argument that you may want to get the Voigtlander, assuming you shoot at the sun without a lens hood, or you hate lens hoods. I know some people hate lens hoods. So again, in that situation, the Voigtlander would be a sensible choice. So then back to the quick crude sharpness test today. All the test photos were shot with a Leica CL, with obviously the lens mounted on the Leica CL. And if this is the first time you've ever seen this channel, I talk a lot about screw mount lenses. These are Leica screw mount lenses, and so to mount it onto a M camera, you need a screw mount to M mount adapter. And then because the Leica CL is L mount, I use a M to L adapter. But yes, if you're going to buy this for your M camera, make sure you get the adapter as well. And just for completeness, they're designed for these types of cameras, thread mount cameras, Barnacks, or any screw mount camera. So as I say, all photos were shot with Leica CL at 1 meter at f3.5 in RAW mode, and then processed and resized in Lightroom with one of my black and white Mr. Leica presets applied. What I did then is I was comparing, say, A versus B, lens 1 versus lens 2. So I did a screenshot showing the lenses side by side, mainly for my own benefit, but then I thought it'd be quite a good way to show you guys as well. So the first test was the Industar 50mm f3.5 versus the Leica Elmar 5cm or 50mm 3.5. On the left you have the Industar, and on the right you have the Leica Elmar. Now please draw your own conclusions from the test photos I'm sharing with you, but for my eyes I think the Elmar looks slightly sharper and the Industar has slightly better contrast. Okay, next we have the Voigtlander Heliar on the left, which is, as I say, the Voigtlander Heliar 50mm f3.5 LTM collapsible lens versus the, again, Leica Elmar on the right. Now this was an absolute slap in the face shock that I did not expect. As you can probably see, and from my interpretation, I think the Leica Elmar is sharper than the Voigtlander. Yes, the Voigtlander's got better contrast, which you would expect based on the flare control, but I think the Elmar's actually got the edge in terms of sharpness. As I say, these are both shot at f3.5. Now that was a bit of a shock. So let's just come back to me for a second. With that kind of bombshell, I was like, well, if the Voigtlander doesn't behave that well, I wonder how some of my other collapsible 50mm lenses behave. So ran upstairs, had a dig around on the lens shelf, and I pulled out 2 more screw mount collapsible 50mm lenses for Leica. Now these are both actually Leica lenses. It's worth pointing out again, I guess, I will do individual reviews for the Elmar 50mm 3.5 in the future. I'll do a review for the Industar lenses in the future, including the 50mm 3.5. I'll do a review of the Voigtlander Heliar 53.5 LTM and M mount. There's 2 versions of the Heliar, for those of you that don't know. Those will all come. Now this lens I've already done a review of, so I'll link it below. If it'll focus, this is the Leica Elmar 50mm f2.8, but just to show you side by side. So there hopefully you can see the size difference. Elmar 2.8, Elmar 3.5. And the 2.8 is like the bigger brother of the 3.5 in terms of bigger in all dimensions. And then the other lens I pulled out is quite a special lens, and there's a good chance some of you may not have seen this lens before because it's quite old and lesser known. It's the rim of the lens. Can you see that? This is the Summitar 50mm or 5cm f2 Leica. So just for kind of demonstration purposes, quickly, that's how this lens looks mounted on a Barnack. Now, as you can probably see, there's a lot more sticking out the camera compared to the 50mm 3.5 lenses we looked at in the last video. So you go back to that video if you've not already seen it. So the challenge was on. So far, the Elmar 5cm 3.5, to my eyes, beat the Voigtlander 50mm Heliar, and it beat the Industar 50mm. So then my mind was kind of thinking, can the Elmar 3.5 beat the 2.8? I'd expect not, because you'd expect if you stop by 2-point lens down slightly, it would give better sharpness than a lens shot wide open at 3.5. And then this is an f2 lens, so an f2 lens stop down, you'd expect to get quite a bit sharper going from f2 being stopped down to 3.5. Now I actually shot this at 3.2 because that's one of the, it doesn't actually have an f3.5 f-stop because it's an old lens. It's got quite an odd aperture scale, so it goes f2, 2.2, 3.2. Sumitar at 3.2 and the Elmar 2.8 are lined up between the f2.8 on the lens and the f4 on the lens because there's no half stops on an f2.8 collapsible. That's how it collapses if you didn't know how it looks. So let me bring up the test shots again. So first we have on the left is the Leica Elmar 50mm 2.8 collapsible. On the right, the Elmar 50mm or 5cm 3.5. And to my amazement, the 3.5 is sharper And I was not expecting that at all. The 2.8 lens is a heavier lens. It is a more expensive lens. And I would expect it to do a better job, to be honest. Maybe it's just copy variation, which it could be. As you can see, the more modern f2.8 lens does have better contrast than the older f3.5. But in terms of sharpness, to my eyes, 3.5 is sharper. And then last up, we have the, as I say, like a Summitar vintage 50mm or 5cm f2 lens, shot at 3.2 versus the Elmar at 3.5. Now, I knew from using the Summitar very recently that at f3.2 it is a lot sharper than I would have ever expected, because wide open it's quite soft. And as you can see here, it's done a pretty good job. I'd say it's very close in terms of the Summitar at 3.2 and the Elmar at 3.5, and potentially the Summitar wins. It's very close, but I'd say maybe an equal. I think the contrast is slightly better on the Summitar, probably because it's stopped down. Really happy with the Summitar results. I've definitely been using that lens a lot more. And again, it's like a 2 lens in one. You use it wide open, it's like a super vintage glow type lens. And then stop it down, as you can see, it competes with modern Voigtlander Heliar lenses, which is kind of crazy. And then to kind of complete the test, I thought we kind of needed a benchmark, like a lens which is renowned for being sharp. Now, in the past, I probably would have pulled out the Leica 50mm 1.4 spherical, which I've reviewed in the past. But I still had the Nokton 58mm 1.4 Nikon mount lens handy from a video I did a few videos ago. I'll link it below if you want. It's a very good lens. So because I have that lens handy and I've got an adapter, I mounted the Voigtlander Nokton 58mm 1.4 on the Leica CL, stopped it down to 3.5, and here is the result. On the left you have the Nokton 3.5 benchmark, and as you can see, that is really crisp and sharp with really good contrast. On the left, so that's the Nokton, and on the right we have the Elmar again, which seems to have outperformed almost every lens in this test. So there's the test results. Now let's look at expectation versus results. Expectation. I expected the Voigtlander to win by miles. I expected the Sumitar to do very well, and it did. And I expected the 2.8 to be sharper than the f3.5, and it wasn't. And in terms of the Industar versus Elmar, as we saw in the last video, they are pretty similar, and it's probably down to kind of sample variation in terms of which is sharpest. The Industar does have slightly better contrast, but in terms of sharpness, I think they're quite similar. In my samples of these lenses, I think my Elmar is sharper than my Industar, going it back against what I said in the last video. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is amazing. And why do I say that? I say that because Voigtlander Heliar lenses are expensive, number one, and number two, they're hard to find, and number three, they're bigger and heavier than the Elmar. So I know you're probably sick of seeing me mount lenses on cameras, but let me show you, because this one's quite important. So I was trying to plan ahead, which is probably how this all came about, of which lens to take on my Barnack Leica for my next kind of walkabout when I wanted to pack as small as possible. So I thought the Voigtlander would be better than the Elmar, so I put the Voigtlander to one side ready to go. Then I did this test, and well, let me just show you the Voigtlander. Here's the Voigtlander, and the main thing to take into account is, see the width? Can you cast your mind back to how thin the Elmar is? I'll show you a bit quicker. So that's the Voigtlander I just showed you. Heavy, much more expensive, and quite difficult to find. Shut up. And quite difficult to find. I had a look on eBay today, and they're nearly all in Japan. And then just to go back, the reason I'm really happy is because look, that's the size of the Elmar, as we saw in the last video. But compare that to the Voigtlander, and that's a much easier pocket size or running size for me to kind of put in a backpack, waist belt, or running vest, or whatever. So I didn't expect this to be sharper, but it does seem to be sharper. And what did I learn from this unplanned test other than the sharpness? I think I will need to use the lens hood on the Elmar if it's a bright day, so not to get that crazy flare. I maybe have to do some night shots and use that flare to my advantage, maybe get creative with it. For those of you that like flare or kind of glow images, as I say, the Sumitar is an amazing kind of glow look lens, really good for kind of super vintage style, traditional Leica glow. But now you know that if you stop it down slightly, it will compete with the best in terms of sharpness. So I bet if you shot it at f4, you're going to get sharp images on a par with the Nocturn, let's say f2.8 as an example, worth knowing. So because this lens flares, I can either use it to my advantage, or I'm going to have to start using a lens hood if it's a bright day. There's the camera with the lens hood on, for anybody that's interested. And finally, contrast is a matter of taste. I generally prefer high contrast images, and for most of the photos I post on social media, I've really bumped up the contrast quite a bit in kind of post-processing or after scanning in terms of for film shots. That said, having a lower contrast lens like the Leica Elmar 3.5, it can actually be useful, because if you shoot in black and white film, it means you're going to retain a lot of the shadow detail. Whereas if you have a really high contrast lens, you can actually clip the highlights and kind of lose the shadow detail. I should have pointed out this is the Leica F with a Canon 25mm 3.5 lens on, which I use as my kind of test subject. Where am I going with this? Oh yeah, so if you look at the circles around the inside of the lens, which are kind of the blacks and the darker blacks, this is the Industar on the left, Elmar on the right. And as you can see, the Elmar has kind of a more open shadow type of rendering in terms of more shadow detail or kind of less contrasty, however you want to look at it. And for that reason, it'll give a flatter image, and that can be nice both for colour photos, for people that kind of like the more pastel-y type photography, or kind of a bit more vintage looking. And as I say, for black and white, it actually might be useful in situations where if it is a contrasty scene, you'll be able to retain potentially a slightly more shadow detail than with a more contrasty lens. That was a complicated way to say that, wasn't it? That's all I have for you today. Hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like button if you found it useful. And again, for anybody that was going to get the Voigtlander Heliar, I may have just saved you a massive chunk of money, potentially £300-400. It's quite a big price difference. I'll go through the Voigtlander Heliar in a separate review when I do it. Just bear in mind, take this one test with a pinch of salt, because I know from my own test results that the Voigtlander Heliar is a super sharp lens. It just seems that the Elmar is also pretty good and just a bit less contrast. So I'm definitely not knocking the Voigtlander, and I'm just kind of more chuffed and kind of pat on the back to the Elmar, if anything. The Voigtlander is definitely a good lens. I guess for kind of completeness quickly, I shared with you the collapsible 50mm lenses I have in kind of my possession. There's also lenses like the Leica Sumitar collapsible, which I don't have, which I'd expect to perform well, but as I say, I don't have that lens. I did actually sneakily test a few more lenses on the side, but they don't really relate to this video, so I won't share them here. But I guess two to mention were the Sumitar DR, did very well. I've already done a video on that. If you've not already seen it, I can link it below. And the vintage Leica Sumitar 50mm 1.5, I tested that lens as well in today's test, just for my own kind of peace of mind. And again, that lens did extremely well based on expectation. I wasn't expecting anything, and it's up there with one of the best at 3.5. So well done to Sumitar 1.5 as well. Again, I'll link that review below because I've already done these videos. Right, I'll shut up, otherwise I'll just go on and on. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you for watching, and a big thanks to my Patreon as always. See you in the next video. Bye.